Section 12 of Police. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Police by Robert W. Chambers. Section 12. One Over. Part 1. Professor Farrago had remarked to me that morning, "The city of New York always reminds me of a slovenly, fat woman with her dress unbuttoned behind." I nodded. "New York's architecture," said I, "or what popularly passes for it, is all in front. The minute you get to the rear, a pitiable condition is exposed." He said, "Professor Jane Bottomley is all facade. The remainder of her is merely an occipital backyard full of theoretical tin cans and broken bottles. I think we all had better resign." It was a fearsome description. I trembled as I lighted an inexpensive cigar. The sentimental feminist movement in America was clearly at the bottom of the Bottomley affair. Long ago, in a reactionary burst of hysteria, the North enfranchised the Ethiopian. In a similar sentimental explosion of dementia, some 60 years later, the United States wept violently over the immemorial wrongs perpetrated upon the restless sex, opened the front and back doors of opportunity, and sobbed out, "Go to it, ladies." They are still going. Professor Jane Bottomley was wished on us out of a pleasant April sky. She fell like a meteoric mass of molten metal upon the Bronx Park Zoological Society, splashing her excoriating personality over everybody until everybody writhed. I had not yet seen the lady. I did not care to. Sooner or later I'd be obliged to meet her, but I was not impatient. Now, the Field Expeditionary Force of the Bronx Park Zoological Society is, perhaps, the most important arm of the service. Professor Bottomley had just been appointed official head of all field work. Why? Nobody knew. It is true that she had written several combination nature and love romances. In these popular volumes, trees, flowers, butterflies, birds, animals, dialect, sobs, and sunbonnets were stirred up together into a saccharine mess eagerly gulped down by a provincial reading public, which immediately protruded its tongue for more. The news of her impending arrival among us was an awful blow to everybody at the Bronx. Professor Farrago fainted in the arms of his pretty stenographer. Professor Cornelius Lazard of the Bactrian department ran around his desk all day long in narrowing circles, and was discovered on his stomach still feebly squirming like an expiring top. Dr. Hans Fuss, our beloved professor of pachydermatology, sat for hours weeping into his noodle soup. As for me, I was both furious and frightened, for, within the hearing of several people, Professor Bottomley had remarked in a very clear voice to her new assistant, Dr. Daisy Delmore, that she intended to get rid of me for the good of the Bronx, because of my reputation for indiscreet gallantry among the feminine employees of the Bronx Society. Professor Lazard overheard that outrageous remark, and he hastened to repeat it to me. I was lunching at the time in my private office in the administration building with Dr. Hans Fuss, he and I being too busy dissecting an unusually fine specimen of Ningu to go to the Rolling Stone Inn for luncheon, when Professor Lazard rushed in with the scandalous libel still sizzling in his ears. "Everybody heard her say it," he went on, wringing his hands. "It was a most unfortunate thing for everybody to say about you before all those young ladies. Every stenographer and typewriter there turned pale and then red." "What?" I exclaimed, conscious that my own ears were growing large and hot. Did that outrageous woman have the bad taste to say such a thing before all those sensitive girls? "She did. She glared at them when she said it. Several blondes and one brunette began to cry." "I hope," said I, a trifle tremulously, "that no typewriter so far forgot herself as to admit noticing playfulness on my part." "They were all tearfully unanimous in declaring you to be a perfect gentleman." "I am," I said. "I am also a married man, irrevocably wedded to science. I desire no other spouse. I am ineligible, and everybody knows it. If at times a purely scientific curiosity leads me into a detached and impersonally psychological investigation of certain feminine idiosyncrasies, Certainly, said Lazard. To investigate the feminine is more than a science. It is a duty. Of a surety, nodded Dr. Fuss. I looked proudly upon my two loyal friends and bit into my cheese sandwich. Only men know men. A jury of my peers had exonerated me. What did I care for Professor Bottomley? All the same, added Lazard, you'd better be careful, or Professor Bottomley will put one over on you yet. I am always careful, I said with dignity. All men should be. It's the only protection of a defenseless coastline, nodded Lazard. And never commit nothing to paper, added Dr. Fuss. Don't never write it. I love you like I was going to blow up already. Ah, nine. Don't you write down some things. Every man he is entitled to protection, and so it is he is protected. Stein in hand, he beamed upon us benevolently over his knifeful of sourfish. Then he fed himself and rammed it down with a hearty draught of Pilsner. We gazed with reverence upon Coulter as embodied in this great Teuton. That woman, remarked Lazard to me, certainly means to get rid of you. It seems to me that there are only two possible ways for you to hold down your job at the Bronx. You know it, don't you? I nodded. Yes, I said. Either I must pay marked masculine attention to Professor Bottomley, or I must manage to put one over on her. Of course, said Lazard. The first method is easier for you. Not for a minute, I said hastily. I simply couldn't become frolicsome with her. You say she's got a voice like a drill sergeant, and she goose-steps when she walks, and I don't mind admitting she has me badly scared already. No, she must be scientifically ruined. It is the only method which makes her elimination certain. But if her popular nature books didn't ruin her scientifically, how can we hope to lead her astray? Inquired Lazard. There is, I said thoughtfully, only one thing that can really ruin a scientist: ridicule. I have braved it many a time, taking my scientific life in my hands in pursuit of unknown specimens which might have proved only imaginary. Public ridicule would have ended my scientific career in such an event. I know of no better way to win Professor Bottomley's scientific career and capability for mischief than to start her out after something which doesn't exist, inform the newspapers, and let her suffer the agonizing consequences. Dr. Fuss began to shout. The idea is schon, kolossal, praktical, ausgesinnig, wunderbar, wunderschön, gollich. A large, tough noodle checked him. While he labored with Teutonic imperturbability to master it, Lazard and I exchanged suggestions regarding the proposed annihilation of this fearsome woman who had come ravening among us amid the peaceful and soporific environment of Bronx Park. It was a dreadful thing for us to have our balmy lotus-eater's paradise so startlingly invaded by a large, loquacious, loud-voiced lady who had already stirred us all out of our agreeable, traditional, and leisurely inertia. Inertia begets cogitation, and cogitation begets ideas, and ideas beget reflection, and profound reflection is the fundamental cornerstone of that immortal temple in which the goddess Science sits asleep between her dozing sisters, Custom and Religion. This thought seemed to me so unusually beautiful that I wrote it with a pencil upon my cuff. While I was writing it, quietly happy in the deep pleasure that my intellectual allegory afforded me, Dr. Fuss swabbed the last morsel of nourishment from his plate with a wad of rye bread. Then bolting the bread and wiping his beard with his fingers and his fingers on his waistcoat, he made several guttural observations too profoundly German to be immediately intelligible, and lighted his porcelain pipe. Ach, weißt, he remarked in ruminative fashion. That Frauenzimmer, she is raise hell already determined. Von pachydermology she knows nothing. Maybe she leaves me alone. Maybe it is to be raus mit me. I weiß nie. It is aber besser one over on that lady to put, yes? It certainly is advisable, replied Lazard. Let us try to think of something sufficiently disastrous to terminate her scientific career, said I. And I bowed my rather striking head and rested the point of my forefinger upon my forehead. Thought crystallizes more quickly for me when I assume this attitude. Out of the corner of my eye I saw Lazard fold his arms and sit frowning at infinity. Dr. Fuss lay back in a big, deeply padded armchair and closed his prominent eyes. His pipe went out presently, and now and then he made long-drawn nasal remarks, in German, too complicated for either Lazard or for me to entirely comprehend. "We must try to get her as far away from here as possible," mused Lazard. "Is Oyster Bay too far and too cruel?" I pondered darkly upon the suggestion, but it seemed unpleasantly like murder. "Lazard," said I, "come, let us reason together. Now what is woman's besetting emotion?" "Curiosity." "Very well. Assuming that to be true, what, quality particularly characterizes women when so beset?" "Ruthless determination." "Then," said I, "we ought to begin by exciting the curiosity of Professor Bottomley, and her ruthless determination to satisfy that curiosity should logically follow." "How," he asked, "are we to arouse her curiosity?" "By pretending that we have knowledge of something hitherto undiscovered, the discovery of which would redound to our scientific glory." "I see. She'd want the glory for herself. She'd swipe it." "She would," said I. "Tee-hee," he giggled. "Wouldn't it be funny to plant something phony on her?" I waved my arms rather gracefully in my excitement. "That is the germ of an idea," I said. "If we could plant something, far away from here, very far away, if we could bury something, like the Cardiff Giant—" "Hundreds and hundreds of miles away." "Thousands," I insisted enthusiastically. "Tee-hee. In Tasmania, for example. Maybe a Tasmanian devil might acquire her." "There exists a gnat," said I, "in Borneo, Gnatus soporiferus, and when this tiny gnat stings people they never entirely wake up. It's really rather a pleasurable catastrophe, I understand. Life becomes one endless cat-nap, one delightful siesta, with intervals for light nourishment. She could sit very comfortably in some pleasant retreat and rock in a rocking-chair and doze quite happily through the years to come. And from your description of her, I should say that the Soldiers' Home might receive her." "It won't do," he said gloomily. "Why? Is it too much like crime?" "Oh, not at all. Only, if she went to Borneo, she'd be sure to take a mosquito bar with her." In the depressed silence which ensued, Dr. Faust suddenly made several futuristic observations through his nose with monotonous but authoritative regularity. I tried to catch his meaning and his eye. The one remained cryptic, the other shut. Lazard sat thinking very hard, and as I fidgeted in my chair, fiddling nervously with various objects lying on my desk, I chanced to pick up a letter from the pile of still unopened mail at my elbow. Still pondering on Professor Bottomley's proposed destruction, I turned the letter over idly, and my preoccupied gaze rested on the postmark. After a moment I leaned forward and examined it more attentively. The letter directed to me was postmarked Fort Kakadu, Cook's Peninsula, Baffinland, and I now recalled the handwriting, having already seen it 3 or 4 times within the last month or so. "Lazard," I said, "that lunatic trapper from Baffinland has written to me again. What do you suppose is the matter with him? Is he just plain crazy, or does he think he can be funny with me?" Lazard gazed at me absently. Then, all at once, a gleam of savage interest lighted his somewhat solemn features. "Read the letter to me," he said, with an evil smile which instantly animated my own latent imagination. And immediately it occurred to me that perhaps, in the humble letter from the wilds of Baffinland, which I was now opening with eager and unsteady fingers, might lie concealed the professional undoing of Professor Jane Bottomley, and the only hope of my ultimate and scientific salvation. The room became hideously still as I unfolded the pencil-scrawled sheets of cheap ruled letter paper. Dr. Faust opened his eyes, looked at me, made porcine sounds indicative of personal well-being, relighted his pipe, and disposed himself to listen. But just as I was about to begin, Lazard suddenly laid his forefinger across his lips, conjuring us to densest silence. For a moment or two I heard nothing except the buzzing of flies. Then I stole a startled glance at my door. It was opening slowly, almost imperceptibly. But it did not open very far. Just a crack remained. Then, listening with all our might, we heard the cautiously suppressed breathing of somebody in the hallway just outside of my door. Lazard turned and cast at me a glance of horrified intelligence. In dumb pantomime he outlined in the air, with one hand, the large and feminine amplification of his own person, conveying to us the certainty of his suspicions concerning the unseen eavesdropper. We nodded. We understood perfectly that she was out there, prepared to listen to every word we uttered. A flicker of ferocious joy disturbed Lazard's otherwise innocuous features. He winked horribly at Dr. Fuss and me, and uttered a faint click with his teeth and tongue like the snap of a closing trap. "Gentlemen," he said, in the guarded yet excited voice of a man who was confident of not being overheard, "the matter under discussion admits of only one interpretation. A discovery, perhaps the most vitally important discovery of all the centuries, is imminent. Secrecy is imperative. The scientific glory is to be shared by us alone, and there is enough of the glory to go around. Mr. Chairman, I move that epoch-making letter be read aloud." "I second that motion," said Dr. Fuss, winking so violently at me that his glasses wobbled. "Gentlemen," said I, "it has been moved and seconded that this epoch-making letter be read aloud. All those in favor will kindly say aye." "Aye, aye!" they exclaimed, fairly wriggling in their furtive joy. "The contrary-minded will kindly admit the usual negation," I went on. "It seems to be carried. It is carried. The chairman will proceed to the reading of the epoch-making letter." I quietly lighted a 5-cent cigar, unfolded the letter, and read aloud. "Jones's Shack, Golden Glacier, Cook's Peninsula, Baffinland. March 15, 1915. Professor, dear Sir, I already wrote you 3 times, no answer having been received. Perhaps you think I'm kidding. You're a damn liar, I ain't. Hoping to tempt you to come, I will hereby tell you more'n I told you in my other letters. The terminal moraine of this here Golden Glacier finishes in a marsh. Nothing to see for miles except frozen tussock and mud, and all flat as hell for 50 miles, which is where I'm trapping it for mink and otter, and now ready to go back to Fort Carcajou. I told you what I seen sticking in under this here marsh. Where anything sticks out, the wolves have eat it, but most of them there elephants is under the ice and mud too far for the wolves to get 'em. I ain't kidding you, there is a whole herd of furry elephants in the marsh, like as they were stuck there and all laid down and all drownded like. Some has tusks and some hasn't. 2 elephants stick out of the ice. I eat into one. The meat was good and sweet and juicy. The damn wolves ate it up that night. I had cut steaks and roast for 3 months, though, and I'm eating off it yet. Thinking as how elephants and all like that is your graft, I, being a keeper in the mouse house once in the Bronx, and seeing you nosing around like you was full of scientific thinks, it comes to me to write you and put you next. If you say so, I'll wait here and help you with them elephants. Living wages is all I ask, also $11,000 for tipping you wise. I won't tell nobody till I hear from you. I'm honest, you can trust me. Write to me at Fort Carcajou if you mean business. Say no more, respectfully, James Skaw. When I finished reading, I cautiously glanced at the door, and, finding it still on the crack, turned and smiled subtly upon Lazard and Fuss. In their slowly spreading grins I saw they agreed with me that somebody, signing himself James Skaw, was still trying to hoax the great Zoological Society of Bronx Park. "Gentlemen," I said aloud, injecting innocent enthusiasm into my voice, "this secret expedition to Baffinland, which we 3 are about to organize, is destined to be, without doubt, the most scientifically prolific field expedition ever organized by man. Imagine an entire herd of mammoths preserved in mud and ice through all these thousands of years. Gentlemen, no discovery ever made has even remotely approached in importance the discovery made by this simple itinerant trapper, James Skaw." "I thought," protested Lazard, "that we were to be announced as the discoverers." "We are," said I, "the discoverers of James Skaw, which makes us technically the finders of the ice-preserved herd of mammoths. Technically, you understand. A few $1,000s, I added carelessly, ought to satiate James Skaw." "We could name that glacier after him," suggested Dr. Fuss. "Certainly, the Skaw Glacier. That ought to be enough glory for him. It ought to satisfy him and prevent any indiscreet remarks," nodded Lazard. "Gentlemen," said I, "there is only one detail that really troubles me. Ought we to notify our honored and respected Chief of Division concerning this discovery? Do you mean, should we tell that accomplished and fascinating lady, Professor Bottomley, about this herd of mammoths?" I asked in a loud, clear voice, and immediately answered my own question. "No," I said. "No, dear friends. Professor Bottomley already has too much responsibility weighing upon her distinguished mind. No, dear brothers in science, we should steal away unobserved as though setting out upon an ordinary field expedition, and when we return with fresh and immortal laurels such as no man before has ever won, no doubt that our generous-minded chief of division will weave for us further wreaths to crown our brows, the priceless garlands of professional approval. And I made a horrible face at my co-conspirators. Before I finished, Lazard had taken his own face in his hands for the purpose of stifling raucous and untimely mirth. As for Dr. Faust, his small porcine eyes snapped and twinkled madly behind his spectacles, but he seemed rather inclined to approve my flowers of rhetoric. "Ja," said he, "so is it besser ourselves that gefrozen herd von elephants to discover, und, by and by, the elephanten by the Bronx Park home yet again once more to bring. We shall therefore much praise thereby bekommen. Ach, was!" "Gentlemen," I said distinctly, "it is decided, then, that we shall say nothing concerning the true object of this expedition to Professor Bottomley." Lazard and Faust nodded assent. Then, in the silence, we all strained our ears to listen. And presently we detected the scarcely heard sound of cautiously retreating footsteps down the corridor. When it was safe to do so, I arose and closed my door. "I think," said I, with a sort of infernal cheerfulness in my voice, "that we are about to do something jocose to Jane Bottomley." "A few," said Professor Lazard. He rose and silently executed a complicated ballet step. "I shall laugh," said Dr. Faust earnestly. "Und I shall laugh, und I shall laugh. Ach, gut, how I shall laugh my Polly head off." I folded my arms and turned Romanesquely toward the direction in which Professor Bottomley had retreated. "Viper," I said, "the Bronx shall nourish you in its bosom no more. Fade away, Ophidian." The sentiment was applauded by all. There chanced to be in my desk a bottle marked, "That's all." On the label somebody had written, "Do it now." We did. End of section 12. Recording by Todd.